Yes. You hear that? No, it's not a bong. I'm making dinner. It's mashed potatoes. It's potatoes boiling, actually, for what it is. Hey, welcome everyone, and welcome back to my podcast. My name is Peter Agostin. This is The House List. Thank you for tuning in. This is my weekly podcast. Thank you again. What a special episode we have. I'm recording the intro in the kitchen because I have to make dinner at some point in time, and I got to get it in to CJ to edit at a certain point in time. We got a window of time here, got a window of time for dinner. I had a window of time to work with for my very special guest today, John Chavez, my friend, and just that's my homie. I've been wanting to sit and talk to him probably since the inception of this podcast too. I'd always hoped and intended to talk to a range of people behind the scenes in the industry. I know that some of the last few episodes have been pretty artist-driven, recording artists and so forth, and they've all been awesome. And I have to say thank you to all the people tuning in, checking it out. Whether it's on iTunes, which I'd love for you to subscribe on and rate it if you do like it, especially this episode. Just search The HouseListPodcast. That's how it's listed on iTunes. It's also available on SoundCloud. That's another easy way to check it out. The House List Podcast. That's on SoundCloud, and I've been peeping that out. That's the way I can see a lot of the data. So I've been seeing all types of people listening from all over the world, getting little bits here and there, different countries. A lot of people in New York City, a lot of people in Los Angeles, as well as intermittently throughout the country, which is fantastic. So if you're a fan of podcasts, if you're a fan of sort of casual conversations about music and the music industry and story-driven stuff, and you know a buddy that's into it, then let them know about it. You know, that's my little promo portion of the show. I got to try to spread the word. I'm not part of a podcast network, and I don't have like a big a publicity reach. So this is my only way of really reaching out to you. I try not to inundate my friends and family on things like Facebook and Instagram. But I do have a Twitter page for this, so follow us on Twitter at HouselessPod. So, yes, this is our 25th episode. And yes, I finally got to talk to my friend John Chavez, booking agent extraordinaire, one of my favorite agents. And as you might know, or rather, some of you may know me or have worked with me specifically as an agent, as a booking agent. And there's probably, I've worked with a lot of them. I met many, hung out and partied with my fair share. And but John, I would say, is probably along with Michelle Cable, who was on the show a couple episodes back. I urge you to listen to that one too. He's probably one of my closest friends as an agent. And I've only really, those are the ones, for me at least, whom I've worked with kind of in a close, direct way. And I've worked at a couple agencies before I started my own, the Agostin Agency, which is what I do now, my own boutique, small agency. I have about 20 artists, give or take, the week, if you will. And some are more active than others. And so John is just someone I've known and worked with for a long time. I consider a friend first, but we met at the Knitting Factory. He was hired to be a talent buyer at the Knitting Factory during the same period of time that I had been working there, through our mutual friend and coworker Chantel Hilton. Shouts to Chantel. I know she's peeped this out for, and I definitely will send this to her specifically to check out. So we shared some time at the Knitting Factory, and I've always wanted to talk to John because even at that time he ran his own booking agency called the Free Agency, and when the Knitting Factory was I guess effectively closing their Manhattan location, which is where we worked at, on Leonard Street, basically in Tribeca. He was, as we talked about, basically the first one hired and the first one fired. And he was able to shift back into a traditional booking agency role at Ground Control Touring, which he remains to this day now as not just a senior agent, if you will, but as a vice president at the company. But if you're just tuning in and you're like, you have no idea who he is, especially if you don't work in like the live touring arena, whether you're also an agent or a promoter, talent buyer, or a band, or you work at Live Nation or AEG or Golden Voice, so on and so forth, then the casual listener and fan may know him more so through the bands that he works with and the bands that he's established as touring artists over the years. And it's like a long list, a lot of great experimental, noise afflicted groups, but just a lot of great rock bands too. I know right now he's on a tear, most recently with the Chicago-based band Whitney. But, I would say John is synonymous with the success of Deer Tick, Woods, Wavves, Vivian Girls, Fucked Up, Real Estate, Wild Nothing, which we talk about, and that guy's from Blacksburg, which was amazing, and I needed to ask some questions about that. At Blacksburg, Virginia is what I'm talking about. That's where I was born and raised. And also he was just instrumental in, as an agent, associated with two very seminal record labels, Capture Tracks and Woods Disc. So we just we go in on that, and we just talk about his life. He went to Grinnell College, and then he interned at Kill Rock Stars, and our time at the Knit. And what's the most crazy part of it all, if you will, is that like less than a week ago, or about a week ago from the day that we recorded it, and that was a couple hours ago now that I'm recording this intro, is that John was in Jamaica with his girlfriend and was like in a freak car accident, and his car that he was in, hydroplane, spun out of control, was hit by another car in oncoming traffic at 50 miles an hour, and they both were in the hospital and sustained injuries. And it's just this was, so we actually talk about it too. It was just such a incredible near tragedy, and they're both okay, thank God, and it's truly a blessing. And so we kind of end on that. So I'm not going to go on and on and on describing our conversation, because we had a long one. It was an in-depth one. It's some booking agent type stuff, It's for the other agents out there, promoters, and so forth. And I wanted to do something special for our 25th episode. Yes, as I said in the beginning, this is our 25th episode of The House List. The House List, if you're not hip to the reason where the concept behind the title itself is a very well known and used term in live music industry, as far as like where your name is, and I've said this at the beginning of every show basically. So the people that are usually find themselves on the house list, at any given show, tend to be, say, other promoters or publicists or people from the record label. Not always other agents, because you never know. You're not trying to get your group poached from you. Excuse my P's. I need to move the mic when I say my P's. Peter Agostin podcast. Don't poach my bands, stuff like that. So, and another thing, the first time, I wanted to do this also to align with South by Southwest, which is happening, as we speak. And this will be an episode. If you're down in South by, enjoy, be safe. It's been a couple of years since I was there, and maybe I'll be there next year. But the very first time I ever went was with John, and it was a super memorable time. And I always look back fondly at during that period of time. I've been many times since, but my first time rolling down there was with John and Chantel for the Knitting Factory, basically as representatives of the club. So this is our South by Southwest episode in a kind of roundabout way, as only the house list can do. As I get closer back to the potatoes, mashed potatoes. I'm gonna turn this off because it looks like they're about done. Made a round roast, and I'm experimenting with the Henry Bain sauce. I don't know if you guys know about that. If you're from Louisville, Kentucky, you might we'll see how that turns out. It's in the fridge. Anyway, once again, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can catch The House List on iTunes, SoundCloud, and the Stitcher app. It's also on Google Play. Please tell a friend to tell a friend. If you're into it, pass it along, subscribe, repost it. If you have a blog or a website, feel free to post it up there. It's free for you. You don't have to pay for it. We're just sharing stories. And John has an incredibly cool story. I was very grateful for him to share his life story with us. So without any further ado, let's check out my chats with my homie, the one and only John Chavez, here on The House List. Okay. So obviously I'm trying to figure out a way to start this conversation too, because one, we've already been talking for a little bit before we started recording, and that we both worked for the couple of days leading up to this too. I've been trying to figure out what the entry point of starting this talk would be, because we worked together in the same. We were employed by the same company, so that's a place that we could start.
The big shared history is that we both spent formative years at the knitting factory, but it's funny to think about though, because we've been friends for years since then, and all of that good stuff. But at the same time, I worked at the knitting factory for 4 months, 3 months total.
Right. It seems a lot longer.
It seems like a long time, and we spent a lot of hours in that building, and a lot of hours at that bar. But
absolutely, yeah. For that 3 or 4 months, it was kind of all day and then into the night every day. But I know that leading up to that, you'd been doing a bunch of stuff, and then from that job, from the knitting factory, you then stepped into a whole new or continuation of what you had been doing. So for me, it's trying to figure out the best starting point, because you were also in an interesting position where you had been working as a booking agent first, and then at the knitting factory you took on a talent buyer role, which is kind of a rare move.
Yeah, it's not super often that someone moves from that side of the desk to the talent buyer side.
No, not at all.
But I had been working as an agent for years at that point. So I had the free agency, my old agency. And I moved out to New York in October 2006 and was running the free agency as full-time as you can be when you're in New York and broke and on the hustle. So,
right.
So I pretty much did anything that I could find for money. So I fell in with Todd P super quickly, and really cut my teeth. Would go set up shows, learn how to put the PA together at his shows. Especially with Todd's, with Todd's stuff. Gear was coming from all different places. He was running down to Canal Street to buy speakers and put stuff back together. So working at Todd's show at that era, where it was Uncle Polly's was getting used all the time. Do you remember that spot?
I remember. I can't visualize it to save my life. It was in Williamsburg or Greenpoint.
It was in Greenpoint, and it was a diner right next to the huge the shit factory,
Oh, really?
Yeah,
the sanitation plant?
Yeah, the sanitation plant. So this is when they were building it, and so the diner was open daytime hours only for the construction crews that were working on building that factory.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Before it opened.
I know that area. I'm trying to picture that room, because I don't think I ever saw his show there.
It was, it was I feel it might have been a food truck or trailer, and they built kind of a permanent thing around it, and the building was kind of Frankenstein together.
Right.
And then Todd somehow met Paulie, I guess was the dude's name, who owned it and would pay to rent it out at night and throw shows there. And
what were the shows? What were these at this point? Were you bringing free agency bands, your early bands, to this, or it was more you were assisting him set up the show and stuff?
I was very much working for him at that point. So,
okay.
The free agency existed, and I would do the way that I knew Todd P was that I was always trying to talk him into doing shows for Barr or Marnie Stern or whoever I was working with, who at that point, even though that scene became something that Todd was doing more and more, at that point it was kind of the older generation of New York bands. That
Like, what would be a good example of
like,
that?
so my big connection with Todd, I think one of the first shows that he ever put on for me was an X Models show.
Oh, yeah.
So when the free agency existed, and when I was living in Olympia before I moved to New York, I started working with X Models through a connection with them through the Kill Rock Stars people.
Right.
So like, there was an X Models side band named the Seconds that put out a record on 5RC, which was Kill Rock Stars' like a experimental label, and that was the label that put out my band's music.
The Punks.
The Punks, yeah.
Yes.
And put out music by the kind of the bands that I've gravitated more towards, like Acceptor and Wooden Wand and the Vanishing Voice and No Neck Blues Band.
Yes.
So the X Models were the first band that I worked for that like consistently would make like $500 a show or $1,000 a show, where I felt like, okay, like
that's legit.
Like, I'm making commission off this, like, and it's actual money. Like, it's not me like hustling up someone to like have a show play to 6 people, and at the end of the night the guy's like, we lost $45. Sorry, dude.
Yeah.
Because 10% of negative 45 does not pay the rent.
No, never has.
So I knew Todd from, I guess that was my connection, was through that scene of dudes. And, but yeah, I moved to New York. I had no money. I had like 2 suitcases. I was subletting a room in Greenpoint that, this dude Sohrab, it was his apartment. Sohrab Nafisi, I think was his name. And he ran a label called Dublin Cube Records.
I don't remember that one.
And he put out the Measles, Mumps, Rubella record, and I was their agent. And so he had hit me up, or was just kind of like, keep your ears out for, if someone wants to sublet a room in my apartment. I was like, I moved to New York.
Oh wow! So you were in Olympia.
I was in Olympia, yeah. And so then it became clear that my time in Olympia was kind of ending. Like, the relationship that I was in was winding down. Like, I had a bit of a falling out with Slim and at Kill Rock Stars. It was just kind of time to move. And plus, the bands that I was really excited to work for that weren't associated with the record label were all based in New York, or like New York adjacent.
Right.
So it was time for me to move out here. And so, so I ended up falling in with Todd P, but then I'd booked some shows with him, my band's playing a Todd P show, but at that point it was like, all right, you need a sound guy, $50, let's do it.
Oh, cool. So you were doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah, cleaning up afterwards, going to the bar after that, know.
So, because that's something that I wanted to ask you about too, because obviously, there's no information about the free agency like that's available online anymore.
Yeah,
I remember the website had it was like a black page with white letters or something. It was a darker hue in your roster because it was still active when we were at the Knitting Factory.
Yeah, so when we were at the Knitting Factory together, I moved here in 2006, October. Moved into the Silent Barn in March or April 2007.
Okay. The Silent Barn being like a venue that was often used by Todd P and some other promoters. Primarily Todd, though.
Primarily Todd. So there was 4 of us that lived in the Silent Barn, and then Todd was like the 5th silent partner. So he actually paid part of the rent.
Oh, cool.
And then would put shows on there, and then we put on our own shows as well. And then when Market Hotel came into existence, Todd did most of his stuff over at Market, and then we kind of just ran Silent Barn and put on shows, and that was a really messy era of shows.
I know. I remember. Well, I remember too because I lived in Bushwick for a long time, and I moved to New York in 2005, and was Wilson Avenue, Knickerbocker area, the Wilson Avenue stop on the L train, which obviously has changed a ton since back then. But Silent Barn technically was like the closest venue for me to walk to, even though it was like kind of a pain in the ass, half an hour walk.
Like a gnarly, dangerous, not close walk. But we were at the Halsey stop, so it was not that, one stop before, 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like, I think one train stop and then,
but those stops are far away and in a desolate walk between them.
Big time, especially then, like 2006 and 2007. Like, it was like there was nothing in between. But I do remember going to the shows when you lived there, because basically when you enter the venue, there's like a corridor, and then you get to the performance space, and the people that live there, their bedrooms are all along that hallway, that corridor.
Yeah, so that corridor kind of wound through the venue in a weird way. It like went straight and then to the right. And then like kind of emptied out into the kitchen / living room / showroom. So like everything just kind of got...
There was a kitchen there. I forgot about that.
Yeah, like the shows played out in front of the kitchen counter, and then there's like the photos of the crazy deer hunter show where like Bradford's like wearing a dress, like standing on the kitchen counter, and I think it was like Moses, who was in Deer Hunter, like put his head under the dress, and the big thing was like, he got a blowjob on stage.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. That's hilarious.
But yeah, so my bedroom was when you walk down that corridor, it was on the left side, and is now what is the bar at Trans Pecos, which cracks me up every single time I go to Trans Pecos, because my bedroom, like, I kept it pretty clean. We kind of used it as the office for most of the shows. I ran the agency out of there, so I had like a lofted bed with a little like workstation underneath it. Had all of the house's like money and all that stuff there. Would do like the countouts at the end of the night, but it was pretty much like not a party zone. Like maybe I'm in there like drinking a beer, playing like Nintendo, like but like there wasn't a lot of raging that went on there. And now every time I would go to Trans Pecos and like that space is the bar, I'm like, no booze in this zone.
That's so funny, because I haven't been there since it's now Trans Pecos.
Yeah.
So which used to be Silent Bar. Because I want to try to even track it back just a little bit further to the agency itself. Just a little bit, because that's hearkening back to a totally different era of like quote unquote independent music, or it's definitely like was a big part of like experimental noise bands of like the mid 2000s too. Like this was all started in Olympia. Right.
Yeah, so I'll give you like the sort of like step by step on how it all came together. So I grew up in LA, California. Grew up on the West Side, which is kind of like, even at that point, was like an island unto itself in LA. Like there wasn't very much cool stuff going on the West Side of LA. There wasn't clubs really that I knew about. There were like a few cool bands that were like around that were.
Like when you were in high school?
Yeah, when I was in high school, probably the coolest band that was around, that was like, I went to Santa Monica High School, so like that were kids that were associated with at that school were like the Grown Ups, which were on Sympathy for the Record Industry.
Yeah, I know the label. I don't remember that band though.
Yeah, so like Eric from Hole produced their debut album, and they like opened for Sonic Youth once, and that was huge. That was cool. There were like 5 girls. It was like just awesome, to have that around. But I just like got super into mostly like Riot Girl, feminist punk rock was like the music that was drawn to at that point. And so with that, you get into Bikini Kill, and then at that point, when, like Slater Kenny was like starting, and Slater Kenny became like my favorite band of all time.
Yeah,
I would like anytime they were near LA, like I was there. One year for my birthday, I like bought all my friends tickets to the show, because I was like, we gotta go to the show, and then my friends are like, all right.
Where do you remember where it was?
That was at the Roxy. That was cool. The Hot Rock release tour. So that was like 1999.
Dope.
So I was just super into music, had a job at that point, so I had money to like have a car, buy gas, go to shows, buy records. Like I just lived for it. And so I was a fan of the Kill Rock Stars label.
Yeah, I mean, living in Santa Monica too, you got to kind of like troop it out kind of far to get to shows too, right?
Yeah, the closest place to see a show was the Troubadour. So like, on like Santa Monica Boulevard, like the west side of West Hollywood.
Right.
And when a band played the Troubadour, that meant that they were like huge. Like
Hell
the Troubadour was like the cool room. Like Golden Voice, I think, was still doing most of the shows there, like most of the cool shows. But like, I remember when like the Makeup would come to town. It was sick. Like an event. Like the Makeup would play 2 nights at the Troubadour, which was like unheard of.
Yeah.
Every kid, like every cool kid around LA would like put on their like tight pants and like white belts and like do their hair, like. And you'd go like see the Makeup play, and you would just be like unbelievable experience. There's like this band, they're like a super tight like 4-piece. We used to wear these like every tour. It felt like they had like a different like colored crushed velvet suit. So there was like on one tour, and it was like these like royal blue like beautiful suits, and like Ian Svenonius was like walking on the crowd's head and all this stuff. And then I remember when they had like a 5th member join the band, and everyone's like not cool anymore. Like, new guy, whatever.
That's hilarious.
They were in like red velvet suits for that tour.
Right. Yeah, he's such a showman too. You know?
Yeah, totally. But so I was always just like a fan of music, and like dabbled with playing music, and just nothing ever really stuck. Like it was, we had like band practice in a friend's garage, and would like cover some Weezer songs. And
right. So you were playing guitar?
I was playing. I mostly played bass at that point.
Oh, cool.
For whatever reason, when I was a kid, I was like, I'm gonna play the bass guitar
because I've always known you as a guitarist.
Yeah,
too.
So I played music, and it was fun. And then I went away to college. I went to Grinnell College in Iowa. And
so you did Grinnell. You went to 2 schools then, right?
No, I just went to Grinnell.
Oh, I see.
I lived in Olympia, but never did Evergreen. But
okay.
But I think that because I lived in Olympia for a little bit, people are like, oh, you went to Evergreen.
Right. That's what I thought. I thought you went to both Grinnell College and to Evergreen, which would have been a crazy double entendre of like, crazy art schools, liberal art schools.
No. So I went to Grinnell, and Grinnell is a crazy place. Like it is.
I bet. Tell me about it.
It's super isolated. It's in the middle of Iowa. It's liberal arts school. It's part of like the whole. There's like 7 like sister schools or something like that that are all related to each other. So if a kid's parents teach at one of the other schools, they can go to any of the schools for free. So there's lots of like professors' kids from different parts of the country. I mean, that's how I know Nick Zerko. Like his parents are professors at the College of Worcester.
I see. Okay.
So there's it's like a pretty privileged crew of people who are going to the school. The school also, I don't know if they still do, but at the time had a mandate where they were going to be 10 to 15% cheaper than other similar schools. They kept the tuition a little bit lower, and they also had a need-blind admissions policy. So if you could demonstrate that you actually need the money, the school would cover it. So there's lots of kids on financial aid. There's it's a mixing pot. Like the people who coming from all over the country, living in this tiny town. Town had like 6,000 or 7,000 people. The school had like 1,200 people.
How did you even find out about it?
There was a girl who was a year older than me in high school. We were both in like the journalism program or like journalism class in high school.
Cool.
And she went there, and so that's how I knew about what it was. And for whatever reason, I like built it up in my mind. I was like, it's this wild place. It's in Iowa. I'm gonna like fly out there. It's gonna have like vintage cars driving around. It wasn't just in Iowa in my mind. It was like Iowa in like 1955.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's amazing.
And so when I was applying to colleges, I didn't know where I wanted to go other than I didn't want to be in LA.
Right.
And so I applied to like NYU and didn't get in. I applied to Yale and did get in. I applied.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I applied to Grinnell and got in. And Grinnell sent me a plane ticket to come out and visit it.
Oh shit.
And
that's what's up.
Yeah, and I went, and like that weekend there was like a awesome punk show. I like played in the open mic at the school coffee shop. I just basically had a really good time.
Yeah.
And was just kind of like, all right, cool. Like this, I grew up in a city. I'm probably going to live in a city. I know that I'm going to, at that point I knew I was going to be involved in music in some way. Like music ruled my entire life. Yeah. This school is kind of a crazy place where I felt like I had a fulfilling time there for like the weekend that I was there. I'm going to go. And worst case scenario, like it doesn't work out, it's college, you transfer. Like it's not a huge deal.
Right. That's a good way to look at it.
And so I went, and so the school, as part of their, because it's in the middle of nowhere, and there's not a lot of opportunities for like arts and culture stuff, they give a big budget to the student government. There's like a movie theater on campus. They bring in movies, but concerts. They have like a big budget for concerts.
SGA, right?
SGA, yeah.
Hell yeah.
And so my freshman year, Carter Adams, who went on to become an agent at Windish, was the concerts chair.
Oh, really?
And he was putting on the shows. I immediately, like, me and all my friends went and signed up for, like, the concerts committee to do, putting together the PAs, making sure the bands had, like, beer and food, and, like, running little scams.
Like to volunteer and stuff, right?
And no, but the thing with the college was that it wasn't a volunteer. Like, you would go and work these shows, and at the end of the month, you'd be like, I worked 20 hours. And they'd be like, all right, here's your, $4.15 towards your, like, student loan or whatever.
Oh, wow.
So you
awesome.
So you were getting paid for this stuff, and you got to be around these musicians that would tour through and be involved in all of that. And so at the end of my freshman year, I kind of hit up Carter and was like, I want to do what you do. Like, how do I get this job? And he, I think at that point, was like, the next year was going to go and do a semester abroad, so he couldn't have the concerts chair job the following year because you have to be there for the full year.
Right.
And so I ran, it was like an elected thing, so I ran and won the election.
Wow.
And so I did it as a sophomore.
Whoa.
Which was...
I mean, what are you, all of like 20 years old or something like that?
Yeah, I guess. I was 19, 20. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so... starting my sophomore year, I was involved for bringing concerts to campus, and the way that I kind of looked at it was I wanted to bring as many shows as possible and book as many bands as I could, instead of having like a couple of small shows and then one huge one at the end of the semester.
Which is kind of like the traditional things a lot of schools do, bigger
a lot of
schools.
Schools are like, all right, we're going to spend like $25,000 on one show and then like a couple grand on like on a couple other shows. And for me, and the way that I wanted to do stuff in my mind that made the most sense was like try to have something every weekend.
Yeah.
And so it was just constant, like booking bands, and then at that point, being the student who's running this committee, you're directly in contact with like all these people's booking agents.
Sure.
And so like I was in touch with Eric Dimmenstein, who like owns Ground Control.
Right.
I was in touch with Jim Romeo. I was in touch with, like, at that point, like it was before like the Windish agency had started, but like Tom was like,
what was it called? Bug booking?
I think he was at Billions at that point.
Oh, right, he worked at Billions.
And
right.
But then there was also the way that the booking agencies worked in the indie rock world was just kind of different. There were lots of small independent companies, like Trey Many had Arrow Booking, and Adam Voith was there with him for a while. Then Adam went and started Decorporated. Cork Agency was probably the biggest thing in the game.
They were killing it at that period of time. Yep. That was really the first agency I think I booked shows from, if memory serves.
Yeah, and so like Cork was going at that point. Inland Empire was like a huge deal at that point.
Robin Taylor.
Robin had like a super sick roster, and she's like this like hard ass like bossy woman, like throwing it down, booking Modest Mouse shows.
Right.
And at that point, I'm a college kid. Half the people who asked me about shows are like, book Modest Mouse.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I remember Little Big Man booking still existed then. So Marty Diamond, before he went to to Paradigm or Monterey Peninsula, however that all folded together. So there was lots of these small little companies, and then here's me as a kid like cold calling these people, cold calling like Ellen Stewart from Go Ahead Booking, being like, I want to book Yola Tango or whatever, This is what, 2002? This is 2000. I graduated high school in 2001, so this would have been, I would have been getting going on that fall 2002, summer 2002 to get the fall semester.
Which is like a pretty important period of time for booking agencies as a whole, because it was like when all these boutique agencies were really thriving.
Yeah.
And there were only a couple, like the larger ones weren't necessarily paying attention to some of the groups that now, the dynamic of the booking agency industry has changed a lot. Obviously, there's been countless mergers, and baby bands have a different kind of value than they did in the early 2000s, too.
Yeah, well, and then there's also, at that point we're 10 plus years removed from, the heyday of, college rock, as a sort of, genre sort of thing, grunge kind of wiped all that stuff out. But at that point, the idea of, indie rock or, punk rock was still, on a business side, still pretty completely separate from the mainstream. And right around then, at least in my eyes, and maybe it's skewed a little bit because this is also when I started to get more involved with the business.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you kind of had like the mainstreamification of like indie rock in general. When you have like movies like Garden State coming out, like, and all of a sudden like the Postal Service is like the hottest band in like the rock and roll dance club, which now doesn't even really exist anymore.
Right.
But yeah, so at that point I was at the college booking shows constantly, in touch with all these different booking agents, and playing in bands myself. And
did you understand how did you pick up on being able to send an offer? Like, did Carter kind of walk you through it?
So Carter like trained me in the idea of sending an offer, but it's it's a college that has tons of money. Right. So it's a bit different than like building an offer for a club show.
Sure, of course.
And so like my big favorite example that I love to throw out, as I mentioned before, like Sleater-Kinney are like my favorite band of all time.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think Bob Lawton was booking Sleater-Kinney. So he ran Legends of the 21st Century, which is kind of the precursor to Ground Control touring. Both Jim Romeo and Eric D worked for Bob Lawton.
Oh, wow.
And
yes.
it was a small agency based here in New York, and I feel like I might have even been dealing with Jim Romeo on the show. I can't really remember. Right. But I was like, I want to book a Sleater-Kinney show. Like, what's it going to cost? And he was like, all right, it's going to cost $5,000 as like the highball or whatever.
Wow.
And I was like, I need to book this band. They're my favorite band. So I sent over a $6,500 offer.
Nice.
And so they confirmed it right away, because it was more than they asked for.
Dude,
and for me, I'm
You're
like,
born for that.
I was like, I'm spending $6,500 of not my money to see my favorite band play in Grinnell, Iowa, instead of having to drive to Iowa City or Lawrence or wherever else bands used to play.
Yeah, which is what you probably had to do otherwise, right? Iowa City was probably the closest place, right?
Yeah, Grinnell is equidistant between Des Moines and Iowa City.
Des Moines.
So they're both like an hour away from each other, but Iowa City with the university there kind of got had Gabe's Oasis,
of course,
like famous club.
Yes, still standing to this day.
And then the university had Scope Productions, which is a lot of agents and promoters have come out of that over the years, but it's kind of like the university's large scale like concert promotions thing where they would do traditional ticketed shows and I think supplement the band's fees with some sort of college stipend, but like a combination of the two. So like I remember driving out in like 2002 or whatever to like see Wilco play an auditorium on Iowa City at the University of Iowa campus.
And it's like a $10 ticket or a $5 ticket or something like that, or is it?
I think it was expensive enough that I complained about it the entire time because I'm not a Wilco fan.
Right.
So I'm in college, I'm booking these bands, booking these shows, getting a feel for talking to agents, starting to have those relationships, not knowing that was going to come in handy down the line. I'm still a huge fan of like the Kill Rock Stars record label and their vibe. So I sent an email to Slim, who owned Kill Rock Stars, and was like, hey, you have interns? Like, what's up? Can I intern for you? And he was like, oh, I only do interviews in person. And I made plans to meet up with him at CMJ in New York.
Cool.
At the Knitting Factory.
Very interesting.
And had a little job interview with him for an internship at the Knitting Factory. Like, maybe it was like all the way down. At that point, the tap room, like the middle room, had a wall. There was like a separate showroom from the bar.
Yes.
Yes,
I remember.
And it was
because the old office was still an office at that point in time, probably, right?
And so we met in like some dark, dank hallway in the tap room area of the Knitting Factory during a Kill Rock Stars CMJ showcase, where I remember seeing like Shuju and Deerhoof and Hella play.
Wow.
And just being like, what is this music? Like,
hell yeah.
Like Hella especially, like, Zach Hill just
of course
going ham. But
Hella was such a great band. They were like road warriors too at that time. They were like touring force.
But Slim's wife Portia, who now runs Kill Rock Stars, went to Grinnell. And so she was like, oh, you should give this kid an internship. He's a Grinnell kid. And that was my in. So he offered me an internship. He was like, all right, if you can come out to Olympia during a summer, sure, you can work for free.
Wow.
And
so it was like after you graduated or something?
No, so I did that. every summer that I was in college in Iowa, I would go to Olympia for the summer and intern and work odd jobs.
Wow.
And at that point, Kill Rock Stars was really like exploding as a record label. You know, like the Decemberists really like caught on really big.
Yeah.
At that point, they still had like Slater Kinney and Elliott Smith stuff. He had left and went to the major label, but they still
had the material, right?
Yeah, they still were putting out like Either Or, which they just did the 20th anniversary
That's
reissue
right.
of this week.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so the label was like based in a little house in Olympia and like moved to an office downtown. I had like a warehouse. There's like a staff of 10 people at least. There were like 3 dogs that hung out at the office all the time. It was like
classic.
It was like a cool place, and I was just so stoked to like be in Olympia for the summer and out of Iowa and like working at this record label.
Was the China Clipper still? Was that? Do you remember this venue in Olympia?
Yeah,
the China Clipper.
The China Clipper was around and only really occasionally did shows. It felt like I feel like I went to a few karaoke nights there and saw like a couple different shows there. But at that point, like the house scene in Olympia, like the house show scene was still like, you know, there's like Red House, which is like a classic punk house that had been around since like the early 90s. There's a Lucky 7 house, which was another one that had been around forever. And at that point, you know, being 19, 20, 21 in Olympia, you start to know the people who are living in those houses.
Sure.
And so, you know, we were just there hanging out.
Well, yeah, and then you're not as apt to be going to a bar anyway. I mean, it's the only reason I even asked about the China Clipper is that I played there one time. I DJ'd there one time. And but I do know that scene, having lived in Humboldt too. I mean, there is like, you know, some
I would say, I mean, like the Arcata Humboldt vibe and the Olympia Evergreen vibe.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Especially during that time, too, because a lot of those bands that were playing house shows, Arcata and Eureka would be on that circuit.
I mean, at that point in touring, when you're talking about, like, just the end of, like, the fanzine era and beginning of the internet era, where bands would go on more sort of like hyper localized, like a West Coast tour could be like 3 weeks long, and you'd be playing, you know, besides playing Arcata, you'd be playing, you know, Davis with the university there and the KDVS radio station. You'd be playing somewhere in Central California, Fresno or Visalia.
For sure.
You'd like, you know, every single town on the coast, like Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Goleta, California. You know, like, gotta hit like the Che Cafe, you know, like all of the
Yes. Oh man, it's been a long time since I heard that one.
Now with touring being more of like a national focus sort of thing, like bands play the major markets and that's it. Like, I mean, I remember Eugene, Oregon being like, seeing it on every band's tour dates forever. You know, everyone playing the Wow Hall. And recently, one of my bands was like, "Hey, can we play the Wow Hall?" And I'm like, "I guess I'll have to find a contact."
Right.
You know, like,
yeah, that's interesting. But yet, still, like, it's funny because like it's like relegated where the genres have kind of shifted to where they play now too. Whereas like hip hop and jam bands still will go to Eugene when they probably didn't. I mean, maybe jam bands did, but whereas like it used to be a rock town for a while, and then that was something I wanted to talk about to you as well, like maybe a little later on, but just really too as the years go by in the kind of landscape of booking tours has evolved and changed a lot, and how certain cities or secondary markets and stuff will be like a particular genre would be thriving for for a while, for a series of years, and then after a period of time, it's no longer, you can't find a show or do a show there anymore. Like now, I'm not taking shots at any of these cities. It's really just more of an observation for my own booking.
It's like a cyclical thing.
Yeah, like a place like Baltimore or Pittsburgh or even like Vancouver or Chicago, where certain stuff worked for a while, and then it's just like whether it's a combination of the venue or the book talent buyer or promoter, or it's just the trends in music and people age out of stuff. I'm just seeing that more and more.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like a town like Montreal, where like when I was getting going and booking, and you know, maybe like Michelle Cable could speak more to this than me because it was like more in the genre, like the niche that she was working in. But for a while, like my impression of Montreal was I had like the super like fried out art punk shows, like gnarly, like like AIDS Wolf and that collective of people were like going strong. I mean, I played a couple shows there that were just kind of like all these like art damaged kids like going nuts, and now it feels like if you have a band that has guitars, it's like not popping.
I know, it's such a trip, man.
Like I have like big tours that route around that market sometimes because it's like between the devaluation of the Canadian dollar versus the American dollar, between dealing with the border stuff, and now he knows how that shit's going to go like post Trump. But like all of these, and then like the show just in general being, having to charge too much money for tickets to make up the shortfall, and like with the Canadian dollar situation, which makes your show worse, or like liquor laws where like doing an all ages show is actually very hard, and like something there's all these things kind of like come together in a perfect storm of like, well, I guess we're going to skip this city for now.
Right. I feel like too, like people like depending on if they need to play New York on a Friday or a Saturday, Montreal always ends up being a Monday too. So it's like they kind of like messed up the market that way too.
Yeah,
maybe.
I feel like with my booking philosophy though, when it comes to New York stuff, like
you skip the weekends.
I don't mess with the weekends in New York if I can help it, unless like a band specifically wants it or there's another reason to do it, because your New York show or your Brooklyn show is going to be popping off.
Right.
And it's going to go crazy on a Tuesday or on a Friday.
Right.
Couldn't you use that Friday in Providence and have a good show there instead of having no one show up? So.
Yeah, very true. Because the Tuesday in Providence definitely is not going to happen for most. Unless you're maybe Deer Tick or something like that.
Exactly.
So then what, just really quickly, what was establishing the free agency? Because that was, ended up having a full roster.
So I moved to Olympia full-time right after I graduated college. Like, graduated May 2005. I think I started in Olympia, like, June 1st. Like, I was just like, all right, moving out there. And myself and Slim Moon and Josh Bloom, who owned Fanatic Promotion at that time.
Right.
Slim had interest in starting a booking agency for, or an in-house sort of booking service at the label to help out with the bands on the label who didn't necessarily have agents of their own. If you're someone like The Gossip or The Decemberists or whatever, like, you don't have a problem getting a booking agent.
Sure.
But at that point, the label had expanded tremendously. 5RC, which was kind of like Slim's more experimental offshoot thing that put out like a couple records a year, at that point was carrying a full roster of bands. The label had income coming in from these big releases and was spending it on the smaller releases. So these bands that were in the more experimental world or smaller bands actually had real budgets to go to the studio or like hire like someone fancy to do the artwork or like have a music video and all of this stuff. Right. And the booking agent side, like having an agent help those bands go on tour, was the one part of the industry that wasn't staying in pace with how quickly the label was growing. So he had like half of the roster of bands had no agent to help them go on the road. At that point, touring was still the main way that bands went out and made their name and sold records and stuff.
So it was establishing themselves on the road. Right?
So it was important for those bands to be touring, whether they had agents or not. And so if touring was something that the label could offer them as well, then cool. So I basically worked at Kill Rock Stars. The free agency was established as a separate company. It was originally supposed to be part of a trio of companies that all had sports pun names. So Slim started a management company with Porsche that was called Shot Clock Management. And
Clock Management?
Yeah. Okay. And then I think there was going to be maybe like a record label called like Turf Records. I don't know if that ever happened. But
because obviously the agency has long since no longer exists. But I mean, when you try to search online for the free agency, it's of course it's all sports, it's all trade rumors and stuff.
Yeah, the only way if you go on like the internet Wayback Machine thing, you can punch in free agency booking was the URL, and like you can pull up like a semblance of the old website.
Oh, no way. I got to do that.
But other than that, it doesn't really exist. And so at that point, basically showed up in Olympia, to live there full time and got the web address stuff figured out, and the free agency existed. But I had never functionally booked a tour before. I had booked tons of college shows.
Sure.
I booked lots of bands playing my house in Iowa. Like, it was a fun time. But
yeah, that's different.
But basically started from square one and figuring out how to book a tour for a band. So I would spend all day like trolling bands' tour dates, like seeing the lists of places that they played. You know, Google the spot, call them on the phone, ask how to book a show there, and eventually put together like a network of clubs that I could reliably call to get shows set up for bands. And
what was the first tour? Do you remember?
Well, I remember my first client was Brendan Fowler, BARR. And until recently, I like kept him on as a client at Ground Control until relatively recently, just out of respect for him being the first one. But he was the one that was like, when Slam and the label were like, we're starting this agency thing. I didn't know Brendan at all. I barely knew his music. I knew it from the label being, putting it out.
Sure.
And he was like, all right, let's do this. You're my agent. Like, congrats. I was like, all right, I'm an agent.
Yeah, there you go.
But, I booked a lot of small tours for a lot of bands that, in retrospect, like, it was tough times. Like, no matter, if there's an agent booking it or not, like a small tour, a not good tour is not good no matter what. And an agent just becomes an additional reason why it's not good. A band is paying someone to send them on a crappy tour.
That's one way to put it. Yeah, but yeah, for sure. And an agent becomes, accountable for everything.
Yeah, and I was learning as I was going along and kind of making up the rules as I went along. I'd hit someone up and had promoters who would trust me to bring them shows that would perform all right, but not everyone is going to perform not every show is going to break the bank.
Yeah, especially if it's like challenging experimental music, noise bands, and stuff like that.
But I had no idea. Like, I didn't know what like getting holds were, or like getting an offer sheet, or like all of this stuff that is day one, square one in booking tours. I didn't know because I didn't have anyone teaching me. So like the entire agency situation was in retrospect really like slapdash and crazy, but also felt really like empowering because I was like, okay, I need a website. I taught myself HTML and like built a website. Like, like,
so each step of the way, it's like a self-taught trade too.
I need a database, and there was another dude booking bands that was out of Seattle, Washington, named Jeremy Hadley, and he had like an Excel sheet that he had built out, and that was kind of like a database, and kind of like using Excel mail merge could do contracts, or like at least take the info that you plugged in and could make a contract out of it, kind of.
Sure.
And so he like shared that with me. I think I gave him like a few $100 or something like that.
Yeah, cool. Because that database and then learning and then figuring out how to make a contract is like the first major accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, and like the free agency contract, was the Cork agency contract, and I took their logo off it and put my logo on the top.
I wonder really how many other contracts exist that basically just have been other agencies' logos removed in someone else's. I've seen that many times.
Yeah, so that was getting going. So the free agency technically started like June 2005.
Okay.
And I was in Olympia. Like I said, I left Olympia October 2006. Mm-hmm. So it existed for a little bit more than a year in Olympia. At that time, I was playing in the Punks, and we like went on a tour that I had booked. And so I'm like on the road. I had a hacked like Trio phone that I could plug into the computer to get on the internet.
Wow!
When I was on the road, and I'd like be under a blanket in the back of the car, like sending emails, trying to book shows for bands, and there are a lot of people who I still know from that era of stuff who
promoters
or like bands, people that I still deal with all the time, that really gave me a lot of leeway in like how slapdash it was. And I want to apologize to all of them for that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I can dig that. So at its most, I mean, what was the roster like? Because I only remember a few, and it's only because I wasn't able to reference anything before.
Yeah.
The one I remember the most, which is probably you did the least amount of shows for, is Pig Out.
Yeah.
Which is from Australia, right?
Yeah. So at the biggest, the agency was after I moved to New York and kind of was like, I'm going to focus on this full time. I realized that being in Olympia wasn't a place that having an agency like that could thrive. Most of my big bands were from New York.
Right.
I moved out here and actually had a partner employee for a little bit. This dude Michael O'Neill, who played in this band Princess, who were from Chicago, who were kind of they were big in the queer scene and kind of electronic-y, kind of rappy. It was a cool band that I got hooked up with through Brendan Fowler. And so Michael was living in New York and was like, I also enjoy booking shows, and I booked for Princess before you booked our tours. Do you need any help or anything like that? And basically he started carrying a roster of bands as well.
Oh, cool.
So at the biggest, the company was the two of us and probably 35 bands total.
Wow.
So
not bad.
It was just enough to kind of be a full-time job, but with no income.
Right.
You know?
Just enough to be stressed out constantly and make no money.
Yeah. So I had that going on. I was living in the Silent Barn, putting on shows there. I got a job through Alec Bemis I was working at Cantaloupe Records as their bookkeeper and doing their royalties. And so the Cantaloupe Records is the record label of the Bang on a Can folks. It's modern classical music.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know Cantaloupe Records.
Yeah, I don't know if it still exists, but they had a office in Fort Greene, in a building on Hanson Street, and I would go in there a couple days a week and tabulate the mail order CD sales and put it in a sheet and then send the bands a letter at the end of the year that was all right, we sold 14 copies of your CD, you get 10 cents.
Cool. Yeah.
But I also was able to because of my at that point experience doing the agency stuff on all of the mail merge Excel database stuff, I built a similar database for them to do royalties and basically had it set up so I could type in the number and then press a button and it would write the form letter that was we sold this many CDs, and I was like, oh, these two things are working with each other.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But in so beginning of 2007, that's when Silent Barn stuff started to get really rocky.
Right. Okay.
Todd was doing more shows at Market at that point, I think, and the Cops had kind of figured out what Silent Barn was. No, 2008, not 2007. So the Cops had kind of figured out what Silent Barn was.
Because it got robbed a couple times too, right?
It got robbed once. We got robbed at gunpoint when I was there, and it was after a show, and the last band hadn't told us they were leaving, and the door didn't get locked, and three kids from the neighborhood ran in with a gun, and they took a wallet and my laptop or Nick's laptop. Basically, it was on the table right in front of them. And then we got the Cops to come, and the Cops were like, what is this place? What is going on here?
Right.
And, the gun had a laser sight on it, and we're like, they had this gun with a laser sight, and the cop was like, well, that's obviously fake. And I'm like, I wasn't really thinking about if it was fake.
Right.
It's holding it in our face, But a few different parties got busted up. I got cuffed up once, and I had to go to court 4 different times for random violation stuff. And
they put you in handcuffs?
Yeah, they put me in handcuffs, and I was sitting in my boxers on the street in the winter in handcuffs. And then they let me go and let me go back inside, and I was just really? But it became clear that doing that. Doing the agency full time and doing whatever work I could find, driving a truck for this movie production, working at this record label, doing sound at Todd shows, wasn't going to cut it. I was either going to have to go get a real job or kind of wash out and go back to my parents' house in LA and figure out life. But right around that time, like December, that was like December 2007, is when like Chantel was at the Knit, and like
Yes,
that job,
Chantel Hilton.
yeah, and that job opened up for like a third buyer that was basically booking like local shows and stuff like that.
Right. I remember.
Then I was like the cool kid from Bushwick that they wanted me to like come in and bring like the cool Bushwick scene to the club.
Right. They're like, Peter's doing too many hip hop shows. We have to balance this out a little bit.
Yeah. So I got hired in December 2007, and then I had already planned to like go home to LA for like a month. And so they hired me, and I was like, but I actually can't start until late January. And they're like, all right, whatever. But
yeah, the knitting factory. So yeah, we worked together in that office. And when it's funny because when you started, like it was like the club was in a very, it was still appeared to be in a very fruitful place, and not that long after it sort of just.
Yeah, I mean, like all of that fell apart in April of that year, and I was like last man hired, first man fired sort of situation.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But I mean,
I thought you had found higher ground first, and then
no, that like so I was at the club for a few months. I was putting on shows, put on a few shows that I'm proud of to this day.
Yes, yeah. What are the highlights?
Like that Yahoo 13 reunion show. Like got all those guys to fly out from California. Got No Neck Blues Band on board to play. We did like a two floor show where it was like Jackie O motherfucker, No Neck. Like it was a big happening of like an older crew of New York weirdos that I desperately wanted to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that was a good one. What was the older man? The father, not Father Yod.
Yeah. So that was that show.
Yes.
So Father Yod was like the charismatic singer cult leader. Right. Then he died in the 70s or 80s, and so this band was his band that he used to play with. That at that point were just starting to get some degree of like critical reevaluation as like a lost like California psychedelic classic.
Yeah.
So it was like right before Drag City started reissuing all the records, and at that point they had like a weird website set up online where you could go and buy their CDs, and two different people had made documentaries about them, and so they basically had this like, I mean they were a cult, but they had this like collective vibe that ended up being influential for like folks like No Neck, I guess. And so I came up with this idea to get them all together to do a show after they had done a talk together in LA, and it like got in touch with the woman who produced the documentary and like made it happen basically. But basically, it felt like to me, or in retrospect, looking at it, like that job at the knitting factory was kind of like Chantel, like giving me like hipster welfare or something like that. She knew I was sitting there and booking my own tours all day long, and as long as I still was able to put,
simultaneously.
So as long as I was able to put 4 shows or whatever in the club a week and make sure that like the bar was hitting for my shows. It was fine.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, that's true.
So I was sitting there, at that point, like the agency stuff was like really getting rolling, and like I had signed Titus Andronicus to the agency, and I had signed Deer Tick to the agency after meeting them when I was on tour with Castanets.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I was always curious, because obviously Deer Tick has been like a cornerstone of your roster post Knitting Factory, essentially, but I always thought that you met them at the club, but was it? Now, tell me if I'm right in this assumption. It was you whom had brought them to the club to play, right?
Exactly.
And it was there that Tim and who had yet to even start his label, right? Yeah. They fell in love with this band, right?
Yeah. So I had met Deer Tick on tour. I was on tour managing Castanets and Shapes and Sizes. So 2 bands that were on Asthmatic Kitty Records, Sufjan's label. And Castanets were one of the cornerstones of my roster at that time. So when it was like, okay, we need to go on the road, we need a tour manager to do it, I like got a bus to New Jersey, went to a rental car place called Rent-A-Wreck, busted a minivan, like loaded in the band to this minivan, and we toured to South by and back, like a 3-week tour or something like that.
And you were the tour manager,
too. I was the tour manager.
And had booked the shows.
And would sit at the merch table and sell merch and book other bands' shows all night long.
Classic.
And so that tour ended up being a total, like, New York foundational thing for me, because on that tour, Lucas Crane was playing in Castanets, who at that point was playing in Woods as well.
Yeah.
And that was my direct introduction to that crew of people, and, like, the Woods crew and the Woodsist label have become a huge part of my business now.
Absolutely.
That tour was where I met John McCauley from Deer Tick, because we crashed in his house in Providence, and he played us music that became the first record.
Oh, wow.
And so on that tour, I was like, hey, if you ever like want to go on the road, I like help bands out with this sort of thing, like, let me know. And that's where that relationship started.
Was Deer Tick a band at that point in time, or was this him by himself?
He had folks that he played with, and he had been on tour solo before with, like, Viking Moses, I think.
Okay.
But it was very fluid at that time. Like, I remember the first time they showed up in town, and he had, like, a stand-up bass player, like Chris Ryan playing bass. I was like, what the fuck is this, man? Like, you know, like,
right.
I don't know about stand-up bass. I'm like a noise kid.
Yes. And he's younger than you too, right?
Yeah.
So he must have been like a young guy.
Yeah, he was a young pup. Like, he was always. I mean, that guy was destined for greatness and destined to write music.
Well, yeah. I mean, you guys have since then you've done a lot.
Yeah, but now I'm not working with them anymore.
I did not know that.
That's a recent development.
Is it?
Yeah, which is
that happens.
Yeah,
that's happened to me a lot.
That's how the biz goes.
Yes, it is. But I mean, it's not to discredit the decade plus that you gave them of your life.
I put in 10 years. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and after a while, I mean, like, you know, you've toured, thousands of, booked thousands of shows for them. You know.
Yeah,
close enough, probably.
I think that band is probably over 1,000 that I've booked.
Yeah, and they have, like, does that includes Diamond Rugs as well?
Yeah, so there's, like, Diamond Rug stuff. You know, John's project with St. Pei, and Steve Berlin from Los Lobos is in that band, and then there's, like, Middle Brother. So that was
that's a lot.
John McCauley and Taylor from Dawes and Matt Vasquez from Delta Spirit. So that was like, you know, there's 3 agents in the mix fucking that tour up.
Yeah. Well, another part that I thought was interesting, and maybe, you know, this kind of all translates into your transition from the Knitting Factory into working at Ground Control, is, and this might, you know, be a step ahead, but it's okay, is that there was this moment in time, and this brings Todd P. back sort of into the fold a little bit, with your sort of first wave of artists that you were working with at Ground Control, you know, connecting the free agency to Ground Control, was how you sort of broke out with, was like Woods, Wavves,
like Vivian
Girls. Yeah. Those 3 really. I mean, not to discredit Real Estate and Titus, because those were a part of it too. But there was like a couple of rounds of shows or weekends where it was like those 3, I think, played a bunch of shows together. It was like these New York college shows too. I remember very vividly.
Yeah. So at that point, so we're looking at like March, April 2008 ish,
right
around that point. So I was working at the Knit. In April 2008 was when I found out that I wasn't going to be working at the Knit for much longer.
Right.
And was kind of in, back in like hustle mode of like, all right, I have the agency is like almost there. Like, it's almost covering. I can almost afford to live here. You know, mind you, I was living at Silent Bar and paying $600 a month and subsidizing that with, the more shows we do, the cheaper the rent would be because we'd sell more beers.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so it became clear that I wasn't going to be working at the Knitting Factory anymore.
Who delivered that news to you? Was it Jared? Or was it do you remember?
I have a story that I've built up in my head and I've told over and over again.
Right.
I'm not sure it's true.
Okay.
But I think from what I remember, I got a paycheck and it was short. And I went to Ari, the money dude, and was like, I'm short. And he was like, oh, you should talk to Shay. And Shay was like, yeah, we're letting go.
That's why you're short, because we decided to stop paying you. That's hilarious, man.
But at that point, so I was in the office hustling all the time. I was working on like the first tour that I worked on for Deer Tick. At that point, Tim Putnam had just been promoted from night manager to whatever he was doing, where he was working in the office. So he was working in the old office at the club in the basement, and then he got moved, like bumped up to the office that we all worked in across the street.
Yeah.
And whenever I was working on a tour for a band, I would listen to that record.
Right.
So I was like listening to the Deer Tick record, which at that time had come out, and it had come out on this little tiny label called Fial Records out of Houston. That was Jana Hunter's record label. And
interesting.
And Jana was one of my clients at the time. So it was like this family affair sort of thing. The label pressed 500 CDs or something, and that was that,
Right.
And so I'm listening to this record over and over in the office, or I'm like struggling to book this Deer Tick tour. And Tim Putnam's like, "What's up with this? Like, what's up with this band?" Like, and I was like, they're great. And so Tim got super into it. And then like a year later, Partisan Records is off the ground. Deer Tick is like their premier client. Tim had asked me about, can you help hook me up with this band? And I was like, oh, actually, I kind of got burnt by like a startup record label, so like I'm not sure about this. And he like went to Providence, met the fam, like made it happen. Like,
yeah, he's such a go-getter. That dude he'll go there.
But so my job at the Knit was winding down, and Ground Control put out a thing that they were looking for like to hire an assistant, basically. And I didn't really know Eric D that well. I had booked like some Rainer Maria shows through him at Grinnell, because Rainer Maria were like the most popular band in colleges in the Midwest at that time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so Chantel basically like tipped me off to shows that Eric would be like hanging out at the Knitting Factory. Like he just booked like David Dondero there, like like a Tilly on the Wall show or something like that. And so I just made sure I was like around drinking beers at those shows, and met him, and then eventually like talked with him about working there. And I was like, well, I've got my agency, I have some bands, I'm not necessarily looking to be an assistant, but I'll do it. Like I gotta work. And we like hammered it out, and so I started at Ground Control May 1st, 2008.
Wow, so it's really like you were able to make that. That's good, to make that jump without too long of a dead space in between, where you're like really trying to like when shit gets dire. Yeah. And
so at that point, Michael O'Neill, who was working with me doing free agency stuff, was also less motivated to be booking shows, and he was playing music more full time again. And he started that band Men with JD Sampson.
Right. Yes.
And so he was in Men.
Interesting. I didn't realize that.
And so then that was when that band started to take off, like do their thing. And so he was like, I'm going to be on the road. And so we basically kind of like folded up shop on the agency, and we had like 35 bands, and I think that maybe 15 made the transition with me to Ground Control. And at that point, it was still very flyby. Like I still had very little experience with like the nuts and bolts of like booking a tour in the modern sense, where it's like you hold every venue for like 4 days and then figure out how it all fits together. It was all very fly by the seat of the pants. So like I was, at Ground Control, very quickly, it became clear that some of those bands weren't going to make sense for that company, and had a lot of breakups with a few people. Which kind of happens. But the first band that I ended up signing was Vivian Girls, and so Vivian Girls were like blowing up the Todd P scene at the moment, and they were from the next town over in New Jersey as the Titus Andronicus dudes.
Yeah, so which town is that?
So they were from Ridgewood, New Jersey, and Titus were from I can't believe I'm blanking on this. I'm blaming it on the concussion.
That's valid. Yeah. Hold on. Okay.
Yeah, so Vivian Girls were like kind of like the new like queens of like the Todd P scene. They were playing shows all the time and like selling out shows, and stuff was going super well for them. And like they had put out the first record on a label called Mauled by Tigers, I think. And then like that record became it sold out everywhere and was like selling for hundreds of dollars on eBay, and it was like a thing. So they were a band that I was like, all right, I want to start working with them, and like ask them about working together. And they were like, no, we're good. We're just going to self-book. And then like a week later or something like that, they got asked to do dates in Canada, opening for TV on the radio, and got like the contract pack for that, and had to do real immigration and all that stuff.
Right.
And they called me back and they're like, "All right, you can be our booking agent.
Here's take care of all this immigration bullshit." All right, that's so funny.
But so yeah, off rip at Ground Control, like I started working with Vivian Girls super quickly. Like Fucked Up had reached out because their relationship with Christian at Cork Agency was ending, and then really quickly got involved with the Wavves folks because flashing back to Woods and Woods' records, Woods' put out the first Wave album.
That's right.
And so I had a hard and fast policy of not working with a band until I had seen them before. And Wavves was the first band that I broke that policy for because Jeremy from Woods had played with them in like San Diego, and he was like, "This rips. I'm gonna put out the record. You should you should book the tour." And I was like, "All right, cool, game on."
Right, and that was like a big, obviously, that first album too. That your campaign with them was a very big, impressionable one because it was the one that introduced them as far as a live touring thing. Like,
really, but it was also like I was still I was still a young agent and I was still figuring stuff out, and so like there was a lot that like if it wasn't for like Eric and like the support that I had at Ground Control, like it could have gone a lot differently than it did because as shows got bigger and I started to deal with like the idea of like pitching a band for a festival or something like that, but through those connections, through being around when like Mike Sniper started Captured Tracks and Jeremy was getting going with Woodsist and Wavves and all of that stuff, I became kind of like the go-to dude for a particular scene of bands, which was cool because at that point I was just making my name as an agent and starting to get myself out there as like not just the dude who books like Weird Noise tours, but like can book actual tours for bands.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's an invaluable place to be for an agent too, to be aligned with a label and them trust you. There's like a trust level and a loyalty that goes like, you're sort of first in line.
You're the first call, basically, when someone's like, all right, I'm signing this band. What do you think? And so, especially with Mike Sniper and Captured Tracks, these were like really like fruitful years, and that like he's like, hey, I found this dude on MySpace named Wild Nothing.
Right.
What do you think? And we're like literally, we're like IMing each other. He's like, I think I'm going to ask him if he wants to put out a record, and I'm like, maybe I'll ask him if he wants to go on a tour. And like,
that helps. Yeah.
And so all of these folks, I got mixed up in working with all these folks, and knock on wood, I still work for most of them to this day. Where it's because of these connections with the labels and the folks that were around.
Definitely.
Me stuff first.
With Blank Dogs, the Captured Tracks he already existed, right?
Yeah, so Blank Dogs existed as a band, and I knew Mike from Blank Dogs stuff, and I was Blank Dogs' agent, but Blank Dogs didn't really play that many shows.
Yeah, he did. I know. You guys had a whole thing where it was like it was still very much shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
He had the cloak.
There was a rumor that I was Blank Dogs.
No way.
And that was like one of the first reasons why I like talked to him. Like he was working at Academy Records, but so he had got Captured Tracks off the ground, 2009 or 2010 ish. Early. I don't know the exact time frame, but that was when he kind of was like, all right, I'm not into playing live anyways. I'm just going to focus on record label stuff. And so he went on a tear where he was signing a bunch of bands and putting a bunch of music out, and I became the agent for like half of that stuff. And that's how I got mixed up with like Dive and all these different folks that he was involved with.
Can you clear something up about Wild Nothings for me though? I know I've asked you this in the past too, because I hopefully I'm not confusing it with another band, but this is the dude that says he's from Blacksburg, Virginia, right?
Yeah.
But was it that? Now I grew up in Blacksburg, Virginia, so I don't know dude. So, but I'm much older than him. But of course, since nothing comes out of that town, and I don't mean that in any kind of mean-spirited way. No, established rock band has ever really sprung out of that town. Did he grow up there, or did he just go to Virginia Tech? That's what I've always been curious about. Do you know his backstory to that extent?
I am reasonably sure he grew up there.
Okay. That's what's up. That's great.
I'm not positive about that, but I've never thought of that as being a place where he just went to college.
Right. I was always confused about that.
We still treat Virginia shows, like when that band plays in Virginia, we still like go a little bit bigger on the venue than it seems like it makes sense because it's like a hometown thing.
Right. But you guys never did no shows in Blacksburg, though.
That was he moved to New York pretty soon after all that stuff was rolling.
Yeah, but then, you can only accomplish so much in that town.
And so before that, he played in a band. See, I had like another weird connection with him because he was like a big fan of Abe Vigoda, who I was booking tours for, and he played in a band that was called Face Paint, I think.
Face Paint rings a bell.
But that they sounded like Abe Vigoda. They had like that kind of like tropical punk.
Yeah, tropical punk. Yeah. Yeah. You had a good run with Abe Vigoda too, right?
Yeah, I'm still like friends with all those dudes.
Are they still actively playing?
No, they're done as a band. Juan, who was the guitarist of that band, has a new band called Roses that
cool.
Jamie Granado just put out his record on the Roses record on his record label.
Yes, that's amazing. That's the homie. That's your homie.
Yeah. So like, I mean, and even being around in New York and like living, being roommates with Jamie when he and Sam got the group Tightener label off the ground, like
that's Sam Smith. Yes, Sam Hackney Smith, who of Fader Complex fame, right?
Yeah. He was like a editor at the Fader for a while. He's now writing for. He's just started will start a job at Vulture.
Dope.
Like as an editor there, writes for Pitchfork, does lots of freelance writing. But so he and Jamie started a label called Group Tightener Records, and their first release was a Best Coast 7-inch, and then
interesting.
And so like because of my connection with Wavves and their connection with Best Coast, there's another little scene around that. So they put out a Cloud Nothings record.
Yes.
Different from Wild Nothing.
Yes.
But I was became the agent for Cloud Nothings too, and so it was a pretty fun environment to be in because I'm like booking, going to work at Ground Control every day, working on booking these bands tours, getting home at night, and then like sitting in our living room in Greenpoint, like hand stamping records and numbering them for the release because he's like, all right, all hands on deck. I got to get these 500 7-inches out tomorrow. Like,
hell yeah.
Let's stamp them up.
Yeah. That's exciting to be there on the ground floor for that and to like have started working with groups really like during their earliest moments and years and stuff. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about them. There's so many other groups. I mean, Ponytail, too. You did them, right?
Yeah, I did Ponytail. And Ponytail were actually one that Michael O'Neill, the other free agent, he brought in Ponytail, not me. And so then when I went to Ground Control, Ponytail came with me to Ground Control. And so, like, I didn't sign them off the bat, but I was like I became their agent after the switch to Ground Control happened and he wasn't agenting anymore.
They're not active anymore either, right?
They aren't active anymore. Kind of lost track of all those dudes. I think Dustin, the guitar player, is living in Japan for a little
Dustin
bit.
Wong. Yes, I think so.
And he's put out a couple records on Thrill Jockey, and Molly Siegel, the singer, he is Willie Siegel now and lives in Arizona.
Oh.
I don't know what happened to Ken Sino, the other guitar player, and then Jeremy, the drummer, is like part of like the extended Boredom's crew.
Oh,
so
cool.
Like when Boredom's does like 77 drummers, he's like one of the core four. Like him and Chippendale and Hisham, and
Did you do High on Fire too?
I did not do High on Fire.
What was the metal? You did like a kind of hard stoner metal band.
Yeah, so I did Neurosis and Sleep.
Yes, Sleep is what I was thinking.
Yeah, so I did the Sleep reunion tour, which has Matt from High on Fire, and I don't work with Sleep anymore, but I still work with Al Cisneros on Ohm, like his other band.
Yes, Ohm, yeah. Oh, yeah, cool. So there was a lot of connective tissue there.
I feel like that it's a bummer that this is a podcast, because we can like put a wall map up and like draw how all of my bands are connected, either superficially through my business stuff, but in real life, like, Kyle from Crystal Stilts plays in Woods now, and this dude from Woods does this. Like, and Jarvis produces everyone's records, and like,
But your history, I know, and it's interesting because, the longer you stay in the business, and that's just a testament too to like how when people stick together long enough and that sense of loyalty, like they'll as those musicians' careers will splinter off and like evolve in different ways. Like I think Emil and Ohm is a great example of that too, because you booked a few different variations of his thing, and obviously really quickly how did the sleep neurosis thing come about? Was that knowing that was just for a short period of time that you were doing that, but did you pursue them, or was it more like a natural progression towards that?
So my connection with that whole crew is actually through Emil, who I don't know at that point I didn't know directly super well. So
interesting.
So Tim Putnam made the introduction between me and Emil.
That's a Partisan Records Deer Tick connection there, right?
So Tim introduced me to Emil because Tim was putting out Holy Sons records on Partisan, and he'd always just been like a huge fan of Emil, his songwriting, and Emil's a wild dude with stories for days and years.
Right.
So like,
and Tim's always been a huge champion of his music too.
Like since from day one.
Right.
And so he introduced me to Emil, who had just joined Ohm, taking over drums for Chris, who was in that band previously, who retired from music completely.
Oh wow.
And so through my connection with Emil, I like ended up meeting those guys, and then Al Cisneros hired me as Ohm's booking agent. So Al was also the songwriter, one of the core dudes of Sleep. And so anytime you book an Ohm show, people ask about a Sleep show. And at that point they hadn't reunited, there was nothing going on.
Right.
And so Chris, who had quit Ohm, was also the drummer of Sleep, and so he was like out of the game completely. Al's focused on Ohm. Ohm signed to Drag City for their releases, and Ohm has been amazing to work for this entire time. It got to the point, I think it was probably All Tomorrow's Parties got Sleep to play a show as a one-off, and Al kind of was like, all right, this is going to work. He found a drummer, Jason Roeder, who plays in Neurosis, to take over on drums. And finally, with Jason in place, was like, I got the drummer that this band needs. Like, this band has a very particular vibe, feel, sound. Jason's the drummer for it. And so Sleep reunited, and he was like, do you want to book some shows? And so I did.
Amazing.
And I think that was 2009.
Yeah.
And so it was, at that point, the biggest shows I'd ever booked. You know, they like sold out Terminal 5. We did like a Wiltern in LA. We did a bunch of really big shows and festivals, and and so it was a very quick jump for me from being the dude who booked experimental bands and noise bands and would try to get $1,000 for a show to negotiating a big 5-figure deal at a place like Terminal 5, and and confidently doing it, just being like, this is what we need, or
Sure. Well, when you have those tools, you can do that. It's it's quite amazing how with an agent, just depending on what you're working with, you can do a whole lot. You work with what you got.
And so then through the Sleep stuff and through the connection with Jason Roeder, then I got involved with Neurosis stuff. And honestly, to tell the truth about it, after with years looking back on it, like, that relationship didn't go very well, and I was fired from both Neurosis and Sleep for kind of dropping the ball on Neurosis stuff. And I was just sort of like out of my element a little bit. Like, I was too far away from where I had started, where I didn't understand certain things about that Neurosis is a legendary band with like 25, 30 years of strong history. Right. And I just didn't really make myself open to like understanding that as much as I should have. Like, that band has like people that they like to play with and things, that the ways that they do things, and I was ultimately like a cog screwing up that machine, and
especially if you're having to shift to completely different markets and promoters and rooms.
But then also, like, personally, I mean, I was like drinking a lot more at that point. Like, I had signed so many bands that were doing so well at Ground Control that was just like not like, I probably was like out at a show or like partying with one of my bands like every single night for a year or something like that, like my kind of like niche that I found as an agent got bigger than I was, or bigger than I could control. And like,
Right.
so, there was like a real period of growing pains where I like lost a bunch of bands very quickly. And, I'd signed a bunch of bands very quickly and then lost, a bunch.
Sure.
So,
well, it's like nurturing those relationships is time consuming, taxing. You're only, what I've learned too, is sometimes you're only as good as your last offer too, or whatever, you might say. And,
but I wasn't doing my best work for the bands, and then so ultimately, it's one thing when you're the only agent asking to book the tours, but like when a band, is doing actual business and actual numbers, and like they're putting their trust in you to handle it, and they can put that trust into someone else to handle it. You reach the end of the line with folks,
right?
And so, I had to take a step back after, that 2010, 2011 period and kind of refocus on, doing my best work for the bands that hire me. Because ultimately,
right,
I'm an employee of these bands, and just as much as I'm an employee of the company that I work for, like the company might write the paycheck, but the band is the one going on the road, playing the shows, and doing the work of, actually bringing this money in. And if I can't do my best work for them, then they can find someone else who can,
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's wise in your years now. You're a seasoned agent.
Now that I've been doing it for 12 years, it's easy to say. But at the time, it's like you're getting dumped by a girlfriend or going through a massive breakup. You spend
I know. Right?
You spend all day thinking about Wavves contracts, and then the next day they're like, never mind. You're like,
Yes. I got dropped by a band one time, and irregardless of who they are, and the management was like, "This is hard." He told me, "This is harder than when I broke up with my girlfriend." That's how that was his way of telling me.
And you're like, "Eat shit!" Tell me about it.
Yeah. Okay, so how am I going to pay rent again?
It sounds like you still have a job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they still work together, and that was years ago. So yeah, yeah. I mean, so. And I know that now, I mean, well, you came to New York in 2006, right? So it's basically, you're past a decade here in New York, too.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. So, I mean, where do you see, like, where you're at now, having worked as an agent for this long, too? Now you're like a senior agent type character, because obviously the industry has changed a lot.
Well, the industry has changed in crazy ways, in ways that I wouldn't have even really imagined.
Right.
When I started working at Ground Control 8 years ago. So at that point, Ground Control was, one of the biggest boutique agencies there was in a world full of boutique agencies.
Yeah.
And now in 2017, there are 3 major boutique agencies, and they're the same ones that were around, or some of the same ones that were around back then, but there's not as much the culture of one person with a web address, with an email address and 20 bands, like there was back when I started.
Yeah.
And so, the industry is consolidated in this kind of crazy way, and I'm really lucky that I fell in with Eric at Ground Control, because I share his vision of running a successful boutique agency.
Yeah.
I don't really have the drive to go work at a CAA or William Morris or anything like that, because there's the impersonal nature of, or how my feeling on it, looking on it from the outside, the impersonal nature of getting handed a band, or booking a tour for something that you don't love, or handling your territory and for whoever comes through, that doesn't really do it for me. It's the long-term relationships that I have with my bands and with the bands that put their trust in me, which is the same thing that Eric has with his long-term clients. He's worked with Sonic Youth for years and years. He's worked with Conor Oberst for years and years. He's worked for Jenny Lewis forever, and it has this sort of familial aspect that I really appreciate.
Right.
And as the agency has grown, and I've gone from being the new hire to a senior agent to now the vice president of the company.
Hell yeah.
It's exciting to be involved with the back end of actually organizing how the company itself is laid out, and thinking about things not in terms not just in terms of my bands and like the success of my bands on the road, but like the success of the company and how all of our bands do. And so we've grown. You know, when I started at Ground Control in May 2008, I was the fifth employee of the company. And now we've got...
Now, that's all agents? That's also including like office manager and stuff like that. Right.
That was
a small organization.
I was number 5 who was at that company at the time. Like I was the 5th employee. They had hired and fired other people, or other people had come and gone. But like at that point, it was Eric and Andrew Colvin and Sarah Marui in the New York office, and Jim Romeo, and Kate in North Carolina. So I was number 6.
Yeah.
And but now we've got 10 people here in New York. We've got Timmy in Austin. Jim is still in North Carolina. We've got a couple people in LA. You know, the company's grown a bit, and in a very like organic and exciting way, where we can sit back and like look at all of our agents with their different rosters of bands that they carry and different styles that everyone focuses in. Yeah. And can like put together a huge event like GCT 15, which was our 15-year anniversary festival that we did.
That was at Webster Hall,
That was at Webster Hall at the end of 2015. That we like all of the bands had bands from all of the agents had bands from their rosters play this like 3-stage festival mini thing in Webster Hall.
Yes, I was there. I saw Steve Gunn play.
Yeah, so it's like you get like Steve Gunn on stage with Kurt Vile and Kim
Lee.
Gordon and Lee covering Velvet Underground, or Lee joining Parquet Courts on stage to do Sonic Youth covers, you know, like stuff like that, where
that's cool.
These bands start to collaborate and it starts to feel bigger than a company or an agency, and it starts to feel more like we're a family. Like that's the stuff that's like exciting to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely.
And the boutique agencies, like that's what we have. That's our strong point, is that it is a family vibe, and like I feel blessed in that Ground Control can be like a strong enough and big enough company that we can like get our bands on these major festivals and do big touring deals with the Live Nations and AEGs of the world. But
you don't feel as though that's not a hindrance at all. I mean, it's basically you've developed those relationships for years too. Although maybe as these mergers continue in the booking agency landscape, those do you think, does it appear as though those festival offers are harder to get to because they're so are they eaten up by larger corporations, or
I don't know if I necessarily feel like the festival offers are a good festival, like a festival that has like a Coachella, like that has a buyer like Paul Tillett who's super hands-on, right? Like who is going to do what he wants to do regardless of industry trends, or figure out a way for it to work regardless of industry trends.
Yeah, if he wants something that he likes, that it doesn't really matter who the agent is.
Yeah, he's gonna make he put Fucked Up on Coachella in 2009 when I had just started working for them, and Fucked Up isn't going to sell a single ticket for that festival, but he wanted that band on the festival. He thought that what they were doing, like kind of blending the punk hardcore world into the more mainstreamy indie rock world, and like doing stuff like writing concept records or rock operas, all this stuff was interesting. He was like, I want them on the fest, in the same way that he's always been one of the main proponents of like getting not necessarily the most famous bands to reunite and play shows, whether it's like My Bloody Valentine or Ride, or like these UK bands that he grew up really championing, whether it's like
Firehose.
Yeah, exactly. Like stuff where like who knows if whatever's going to happen, but like if like a Fugazi reunion happens, I feel like that Paul will be involved with it in some way. He put like Ian MacKay and he put the Evens on Coachella.
Yes, I remember that.
I watched him play with like 20 of my best friends, and that was it.
That was so dope when he did. That was a few years ago.
Yeah, that was a few years ago.
Yeah, that was cool. The Evens. Yeah. Are you going to South by Southwest this year?
No, I'm on a every other year schedule.
Right,
So
nice.
last year I had a bunch of younger bands that I had started working for who really went to South by and like hustled it super hard, and this year I don't, and so it like kind of naturally works out.
Yeah. My first time ever going was with you.
Oh, when we got the Knitting Factory to send us.
Yes, they flew us down and put us up. It was me, you, and Chantel. And I went, after that, it was a succession of years in a row. It was like 6 or 7 years in a row. And it's been a couple of years for me because sometimes it felt like in years previous, it was more and more of a traumatic experience being there and shit. But I think it's all relative to, one, the bands that you're working. This is coming from a booking agent standpoint, too. So it's obviously very different for performers or fans, if there are fans that go, I think, but I always hold that first trip in high regard because it was like we went as promoters, I guess.
Yeah, we were like representing the Knitting Factory down there. We put together a showcase and got like Dan Deacon play or
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the room that it was at. It was like that weird Emos 4 room that was like right on like they took over the restaurant in between the two sides of Emos.
Yes, in the corner.
Yeah, it was like right on. It was like right on a
right
corner.
Where you sell those sausages right in the corner.
Yeah, the best worst.
Yes, man. Those first few years, that would be like I would have those for breakfast and shit.
But I mean, South by, it's a completely different music industry and landscape than it was even back then. Than it was back then.
Right.
I feel like that there was the attitude and vibe, and it was true that a band could go to South by and put on like 4 like fucking 6 shows and come out of there with like an agent and a publicist and a label.
Yeah.
And you went down there to sort of like make it happen.
Right.
And that was like the tail end of that. And like now, all the big shows are either branded and have whatever B-list rapper they can afford to headline.
Right.
Or Lady Gaga, whatever mainstream star wants to go and make a cool splash.
Yeah.
Or they're like label shows or stuff where it's like the bands you're not going down there to like find your agent. You already have them in place. Like,
it's more to be like, this is our brand, this is our agency that we represent, and here are all our new groups that the agent is showing off their new signees.
And so when I started at Ground Control, we always wanted to go as big as possible with the South by stuff. Every year we did Auditorium Shores, which was like the biggest South by stage, and we would get one of the biggest bands on the roster, whether it was Bright Eyes or She and Him or someone to headline the show, and then put on a few of our younger bands on the big festival stage to kind of introduce them to people.
Yeah.
And Auditorium Shores is one of the few South by shows where people from Austin really do show up, like the casual showgoer, because you don't need a badge or anything to go.
Right.
It's like on the waterfront, it's free. It's like 4,000 cap or whatever, and you don't have to deal with like the hustle and bustle of like, I got a badge and a wristband and like skip the line for this, and I'm on the guest list for that. You just cruise and go. But we had like a couple year run where like 1 year was like rained out completely. Like it was just that we had 2 like shitty years in a row, and then we're kind of like, all right, this is too. We can't ask our bands to do this,
right?
For,
And South by, I mean, I feel like Austin can be a total risk too at that time of year when the weather can change like overnight. Like,
I mean, Austin's had a tough run with weather in the past few years, whether it's South by stuff or like, like fun, and then Sound on Sound Fest getting rained out or screwed with last year.
Yeah.
And then our like ACL like got rained out, like flooded one day last year. Like it's a mess. Austin Psych Fest like cashed.
Oh yeah, dude, that's so true. That's so crazy too. Yeah,
that's like global warming, like changing the rainy season and just screwing up festival times.
Yeah, in a town that otherwise was always perpetually warm and nice, and dry. Well, you definitely had like amazing runs at Miss B's, like the Todd P era of stuff that you were doing, the free agency era, even like the early Ground Control era. Those were like some seminal, like guitar-driven band South by Southwest.
Yeah, I mean, there was just like watching those old videos of South by. I was watching not that long ago. There was like one of the days at Miss B's that I was involved with where it was like No Age and Wavves, and No Age are like old LA buddies and not a band I ever worked with professionally. We always just got along. It's like No Age, Wavves, Woods, Real Estate, Vivian Girls, and there's like me like sitting on top of Woods' van like with a tall can of beer because like you didn't have to go into the bar and buy a beer. You could just like drink them outside. And now that whole zone of Austin is like...
That's South 6th Street or...
that was East 6. So
E6.
On the other side of the highway.
Oh my God, it's totally different.
Like Miss B, when Todd started doing shows at Miss B's, it was like a low-key, like, closeted Mexican gay bar sort of thing, where they were like, all right, we got a patio, put on some show, like, you can do your thing.
What was Cheer Up Charlie's? That was right next to it, too, right?
No, it's just Cheer Up Charlie's bought Miss B's and turned it into the first Cheer Up Charlie's.
Oh,
and then it went on for 1 year at Cheer Up Charlie's, and they were like, had taken the empty lot that was next to Miss B's and like fenced it off and made it a VIP section, and we were like, "What's going on?"
Fuck that shit. That's whack.
Like it's like literally like an empty lot full of syringes. Like this is not
right.
This is nobody's VIP section. But
I mean, just
but that was like that was the year where like Todd booked like Lil B to like play on top of his like Todd's like Corolla was like a stage,
right?
Like, caved like the roof in, like all sorts of wild stuff was happening, and then parallel to that was like Timmy Hefner, who now is at Ground Control, doing like those legendary like bridge shows where there's like the pedestrian bridge that goes over the river.
Of course,
so basically police couldn't get there. Because it's not wide enough for a car.
Oh, hell yeah. This is his Chaos and Chaos era, too, as well, right?
So he would put on the Chaos and Chaos Festival, and then would have these bridge shows where it was like... There was 1 year where, it was like Fucked Up and Vivian Girls, and it was like right before I started working with Fucked Up, and they were like... But I was working with Vivian Girls, and they were super excited to play with each other, and, it was like 1 a.m., everyone just wanders out onto this bridge over the river and plays a show, and then, like, runs away.
Yeah, man, the story... I mean, we could talk about these stories for a million years, too. And I love it. I mean, you're always been one of my favorite agents to watch, too, because you've been... you've just evolved in a cool way and have always figured out a way to keep it going, too. Like,
and you got to do stuff to keep it interesting. Like, at this point, like, I've been booking now for 10 years. I love my bands. Like, it's still, like, every time I feel like I've ever made a decision to like chase a buck or whatever, it hasn't worked out, and so I just stopped doing that. So it's kind of fun in that I've got a roster full of bands that I really love, that I respect, and I'm like still excited to go see them play all the time. And a few of them have gotten big enough that like we can come up with crazy ideas and then make it happen.
That's amazing.
Which is very gratifying to like be sitting at a show, like sipping a beer, like watching 3,000 people have a blast, and you're like, I came up with this idea like stoned to the bone on my couch, like now here's everyone like having a blast, like we did it. And there's been some misses along the way, but at the same time, like you can't really get concerned with that sort of stuff.
Are you still? Do you like actively look at bands? Like, do you try to? I mean, at this point in time, I'm sure you're busy enough with what you have. Like, would you?
I mean, I always am. I
know that's kind of a rhetorical question.
No, but like I constantly am listening to new music, and I guess the main thing is just figuring out. It has to be like the perfect storm of a band for me to really want to take it on. But like, I feel like that I'm strong enough with my trust in my gut and my in the process that if the right band does come along, if I saw the right band play tonight, then I would be all about it. So like the last band that I signed was Whitney. And that was like a year and a half ago, and this has been like the craziest year and a half ever. We went from like them playing to 10 people at home in Chicago to, they're playing some really big shows.
Dope. That's awesome. That's what's up.
So they're about to come back to New York and play Brooklyn Steel and sell 1,800 tickets.
No way. Oh, okay. Yeah. I like that.
And then we've got some other stuff that's coming soon that's bigger and better than that. To be able to take a step back and say, like, okay, not only do I love this band's music, not only do I like talking with them as people, not only have they surrounded themselves with a good team of people who I trust to deal with, but, like, I think I have, like, a vision for this and somewhere where we can go that's bigger than, going on the same tour that we've all booked a million times.
Over and over.
And, so when the right thing does come along, I still go after it. But then I also trust myself to say, like, you know what? It's okay for me to be a fan of this band, and and I'll go to their shows and I'll have a blast and I'll enjoy their records, and probably listen to their record more than a band that I book because I spend all day thinking about the band that I book.
Internalizing it, taking on like all that. anticipation to turn it into something like and build it into something. I mean, man, yeah, dude, tell me about it.
Yeah,
like I've been there.
Getting to the point like a few years ago where I got comfortable enough with myself to say like I'm gonna stay a fan and not like figuring out how to force it was a huge thing for me because I'm lucky in that my bands are doing well and I'm like successful enough that I can say that like I'm not going to force it. But then there's also stuff that comes up. Like I work with this dude, CW Stone King, who's from Australia, who's kind of a more like vintage sounding old like blues, almost Zydeco guitar player.
Oh wow,
which
cool.
is probably more in line with music that I listen to at home. And like his music came across my desk, and I was like, you know what? This is different for me. It's going to be dealing with a different set of promoters and a different, basically a parallel industry, that's more focused on like the Nashville side of stuff. And, and I think this is going to be interesting, and I'm going to do it because I think that it's fun to stretch in that way.
Sure.
It hasn't been the easiest thing, but it's been really rewarding. Like when I do get those bookings for them, where I'm like, all right, like it's happening.
You get those small victories start to lead to something.
It's like he's on Newport Folk Festival.
Oh, well, there you go.
We did it. You know?
That's huge.
And it's not paying anybody's rent, but we're building something.
Right. Would you want to talk about your trip at all? What just happened?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, and maybe this would be an interesting and somewhat relevant way to close our conversation too, because you just got home like a couple days ago. And you and I had been talking about trying to get together and do this for a while too, and serendipitously this sort of is we're talking now, but I mean but you were just in Jamaica.
So I was just in Jamaica for what was going to be my first vacation in years. Like that was,
I don't doubt that at all.
Our first vacation wasn't like planned around a music festival or anything like that.
That didn't have a band of yours playing also.
I like put on an out of office message. I was like, I'm actually out of office.
Right. Yeah, I feel that.
And so went down to Jamaica. It was a week ago Thursday, so I think it was March 2nd. And upon arrival on the way to the hotel, got in a very bad car accident. And spent the rest of my time there in different hospitals helping out with my girlfriend, who was pretty seriously injured. And then got home last Sunday. And so I've been home for exactly a week now. And just sort of dealing with the aftermath of that, like, going from what was going to be a mellow vacation, time out of the office, trip, rest to recharge, basically.
Sure. Yes.
To like dealing with hospitals and insurance settlements, and making
like
sure
in
that
another
bands,
country too.
And making sure my bands are covered, and making sure that I'm not too banged up to work because so like I had a concussion, and I got a fractured rib and sprained my ankle, and all of that stuff is ultimately pretty superficial. Like I'm fine. And that's lucky because it was
amazing.
It was a bad accident.
Yeah. And your girlfriend is doing okay.
She's back
doing
home.
better.
She's back home and is going to recover, and it seems like that both of us are going to make full and complete recoveries from a head-on accident at 50 miles an hour where we could just as easily have been dead.
Yeah, man. I mean, I don't know if you believe in karma or any of that, but I mean, definitely are very fortunate, if not lucky.
No, I mean, I definitely believe in it to the point where, and I hope that you see this through not just this conversation, but 10 years of dealing with each other. That try to put a good vibe out into the world and not worry about stuff that you can't, that you have no control over.
Chillers only, man.
Chillers only, and I feel lucky that I can come out of it and saying like, all right, the worst that's happened is like I have a bump on the head and I'm kind of like foggier than I would be. It basically feels like I'm hungover all the time.
Yeah.
And hopefully that goes away soon. But
I think, it's just incredible. I mean, obviously we, having talked as long and talked about as much stuff as we have, like which I'm very grateful for. But that it's like that you're able to just, that you kind of came out of this whole thing unscathed to the point where you can look back and actually be like, wow, like, and talk about it, and it's only a few days ago, like a week ago.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably great. And
no, I'm just lucky that we came out of it as unharmed as we were, and hopefully she makes a full quick recovery, and it seems like stuff's going that way. And but like I touched on before, like all I do all day is think about sending bands on the road and having them drive around the country, and not the safest conditions sometimes. Sometimes you're touring the Rockies in January, and like you need a day off to get over the snowy mountain pass.
Or like there's like a hurricane, like in Alabama or something like that, or tornado and shit. Like that stuff is, when you're a booking agent and a touring artist, you're booking all year round, no matter what the season is. So
and you it's a lot, and we also book very far in advance.
Yes,
I'm like sweating it out in July, booking someone's like February tour.
No doubt.
Not thinking about that, like
we don't know what's going to be like that.
The road between Toronto and Ottawa is going to be -20 in February, because right now I'm like in shorts or whatever.
I know, it's such a bizarre line of work.
But all that stuff can just come at you so fast out of nowhere that I think it's important to just be able to like take a step back and say like, yeah, that sucked. It was awful, but we're all here. We're all healthy. Let's keep it moving,
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you so much for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks for having me over, and it's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun
hell
to talk about all this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've been wanting to do this for a while.
Talk about some stuff I haven't thought about in a minute,
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot, man. And you worked with a lot of musicians and labels and managers and publicists. So, yeah, it's those types, especially booking agents, I think, that just they've been so connected to so many different kinds of people. You have like, we're not digging too deep. Like, I know you have real deal stories, but some of those stories aren't meant to be recorded.
Keep it surface. Those are other people's stories to tell.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yes, that was awesome. I want to thank my guest, John Chavez, for coming through and being on the house list. What a treat, and we finally did it, and it was what an awesome, great conversation that was. I also wanted to let you know that at the beginning of the show I played a song, sort of dissident, noisy, loopy kind of track. That was John's band, The Punks. And that was a song called Air It Out. There's actually a music video for it if you want to seek that out. I don't know if John wanted me to put it out there like that. That came out on Kill Rock Stars. So I opened the show with that. We're going to close the show with a song by the Vivian Girls from their self-titled debut on In the Red from 2008, if I'm not mistaken, called Where Do You Run To? I feel like that this sort of sums up a phase in John's booking career as an agent, and it kind of set a nice tone. So I wanted to close the show with that, at least a portion of it. And I also wanted to let you know that I appreciate you guys for listening. If you made it to the end, please subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on SoundCloud. It's also on the Stitcher app if you listen to podcasts that way. It's even on Google Play. So there's some ways for you to check it out. If this was your first time listening, please subscribe, rate it on iTunes, leave a comment. Those things help. I appreciate it. I wouldn't ask otherwise. I just love doing these and want to continue doing them. That's all. My humble request. So since this is also like basically not just our 25th episode, which is a landmark in my opinion. Obviously there's millions of podcasts out there, and there are hundreds and hundreds of episodes in front of us, and not that I'm competing by any means, but getting each and every one of these off the ground is a bit of an accomplishment. Because we all gotta strive, and I'm not making any money, I'm spending money doing this, and I run my own booking agency as well, the Augustin Agency, and I book tours, and that's a very time-consuming line of work. So fitting these in is it's both a treat. It's very fulfilling, but it is like a side job in itself. So to get to 25 is pretty awesome, and I'm glad I could share it with John. And it sort of hitting at South by Southwest, the week of South by Southwest. So hopefully we get this out to you in time, because, we also got to coordinate our own schedules just to get this all edited and engineered with my man CJ. So I wanted to share really quickly a story from one of my previous South by Southwest experiences, just because I'm seeing, especially with the blizzard that came to New York, or rather the snow ice storm, and how traveling there is such a pain in the ass. Even on the best conditions, it's still a pain in the ass. And I've been there a lot of different ways, traveling with bands, flying in, driving in, so on and so forth, tour managing groups into it. But in 2013, when I was working at Inland Empire Touring as an agent, I went down with my coworker and good friend, Joe Price, who now works at Ground Control and is an awesome agent with lots of years under his belt, and he's just a great human being. So shouts to Joe. So we went down together, and we got a hotel. We're both had our own handful of bands to tend to and to oversee, and our own showcases and so on and so forth. So I think we both planned to leave Austin on the Saturday, not wait until Sunday. For the most part, people will go down and they'll leave on Monday, or they'll stay even later. I thought we were going to be slick and kind of slip out before the big rush, essentially. Although it's I don't even think that's even possible anymore. There's just so many people coming and going. So we had some stuff that Friday, showcases, and still had to be out and up late regardless. And but we had to catch an early flight in the morning. I think we even got a 6 a.m. flight or 7, something crazy like that. And we call, we wait until the morning time and call a cab, a taxi. And the taxi system in Austin is sort of ridiculous as well, for what it's worth. No shots, but still, it's just coming from New York City, and their taxi system is just kind of archaic. And especially during South by, you'll be lucky to catch a cab, and we were not lucky. We did not luck out. In fact, our cab never showed up. We waited an hour, stressing out before the sun came up, being yo man, what's up with this cab? It's not showing up. We're looking at our watches, looking at each other, shaking our heads. And the time kept creeping closer and closer to us, missing the window for our flight. And as it was, that fucking car never showed up at all, and we were livid. And subsequently, we basically missed our flight. We eventually got another car and had to wait another crazy long amount of time. And still got there in the early morning, but we were okay, still early. It's 8 o'clock or something. We'll just get standby to New York. There's so many flights going out. We're bound to get on one. It's still early in the morning. Our line of thinking was it's Saturday morning, so there's people that have been out. They're drunk. They're hungover. They've been partying all night. They're gonna miss their flight. We're gonna get on this flight. It's all good. Yeah, no worries, dude. Oh, okay. First flight's packed. Yeah, it makes sense. Those the really early birds, they're together. They weren't partying, so maybe on the next one, at 10 o'clock, and then that just kept going and going and going, and no one. We were just on standby, flight after flight, seeing all types of cats go past us, getting on flights. Saw A-Track and talked to him for a while. He was going back to New York at the time. It's just a host of different performers and artists. I even saw Nelly, I think, waiting to get on a flight, the same kind of flight that we were getting on. So we sit there and we wait, and it's 10, 12 hours goes by on standby in the Austin airport, which is a small airport. And then after a while, if you spend that much time kind of pacing around the airport, you start feeling kind of like shit. And it's a small airport. You start breathing in that airport air, and you can't really leave to go outside or anything like that. After a while, we were just like, we got to the point where it was like 5 o'clock or almost 6 o'clock. It was dinner time, damn near. So Joe and I looked at each other after having a couple beers and kind of just wasting the day at the airport on standby, not getting on anything. We're like, we're going to have to just get a hotel across the street at this Hilton, at the airport hotel, which is the only hotel right by the airport. So we do that begrudgingly. We're both pissed off, but you got to do it. Get our shit and walk across basically the airport parking lot and check in. It's like, all right, cool. Well, we're gonna get on that next flight in the morning, tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. So we're gonna like set our alarms for 4 o'clock in the morning. We're not gonna miss this. We're gonna treat ourselves. Oh, they got a pool. Shit, man, it's hot. Let's just like hang out by the pool for a while. I jumped in the pool. I'm like, fuck it, man. Like, I'm gonna, if we got, after that ordeal, like, I'm gonna kick back a little bit. Got out. Let's get some steaks. So we went back into the hotel restaurant and like started having drinks at the bar. We got steaks. We're just like, treat ourselves a little bit, because this is some bullshit. And then finally that morning comes by, just like feeling like shit, spending way too much time in the airport. We get on these flights. It's like the first flight out of the day, and if it is not the most insane turbulence I've ever experienced in my life, the whole fucking trip. And I've flown a lot and had some insane international turbulence experience on giant planes, like to Japan a couple of times, where that Japanese trip turbulence is like another world of fright. But this is such a small plane, the nonstop flight from Austin to New York City. Many people do that all year round. And I don't know if it was but basically for us, actually, yes, it was like a tornado watch. And how you can see the tornado, you can monitor it on the Weather Channel. And basically we're both like in our seats watching the little TV screen monitors in front of us of this fucking huge tornado that's like right under the flight path. And we're just like getting all the residual wind. And it's like an insane white knuckle experience. So like the whole time. And it's like, I never want to fly again. And praying that we get home safe. And it's like a 2-hour flight. I mean, it's like not that crazy, or a 3 or something. So man, we finally get back to New York, just being like, oh my God, like kissing the ground of the sidewalk of JFK, just not giving a fuck. Like, Joe, man, I'm so happy we made it, dude. I didn't think we were going to make it after all that, and being in the airport for 12 hours yesterday, just wanting to like jump through the window and shit. So we say our goodbyes. Yo, I'll see you at work. I'll see you in the office, tomorrow or the day after. Like, I need to take a fucking break, Either way, coming home from South by, you always have to like recuperate a day at least. And I get home, and like an hour later, and it's like evening time now, after this fucking huge ordeal following South by, exhausted on top of everything else, and just being so freaking frazzled and wired from this insane turbulence, thinking the plane was going to fall to pieces in the sky, and this was it. And I start getting home, I'm like, damn, man, I feel really shitty. I don't feel well. I guess South by really kicked my ass this year. I shouldn't have eaten so much barbecue, or whatever. And I'm not even a hardcore partier by any means. I'm pretty modest across the board. And I'm like, man, I think something's wrong. And then, like, for like the next 6 to 10 hours, I'm just throwing up nonstop the whole time, all night long, to the point where, like, late in the night, I hit up Joe. I'm like, Joe, are you sick, man? Like, are you okay? Because something is definitely wrong with me. And this dude had the exact same thing going on. So we're just like, it was like a week of like insane flu, insomnia, like insanity. And this poor guy and me is like, we're exactly the same experience. Yet for weeks and weeks after that, we were trying to track what the hell happened, because we spent like all this time stuck in the airport together, and then went to this hotel and had the same meal and like had the same drinks, and it was just like this disgusting experience that was separate yet, simultaneously happening to both of us. And that's my South by Southwest story. And so if you're down there, if you're traveling, or coming back, or if you're continuing on the road from there, just be safe. Be careful what you eat and drink when you're down there, and don't be staying at that Hilton across the street from the airport. That's no go. Now Cypher, please don't stay there. Shout out to Joe, and I want to thank John again, and thank you guys for listening to my little story. We're going to close this out with the Vivian Girls. I'll see you guys next week, only here on The House List. Later.